you for the opportunity to
Yeah.
present today, Paddy. My research is ongoing on this topic, but delighted to share what I've uncovered so far and some of the insights. So let's see. Okay. So just a bit of a background to the research is obviously we're post-pandemic now, although we see spikes of variants coming in all the time. So it's understanding like the future of work came on us in a rush, if you like, with the pandemic, and now we have time to catch our breath and see what has changed for employees, for the workplace, and indeed for the future of work itself. And I suppose the employee's experience then is a valuable resource for considering where does remote working sit in the future? Is it hybrid? Is it fully remote? It coming down to companies, coming down to employees. So I'm looking at it through the perspective of effective events theory by Weiss and Crapanzano from 1996, which in essence hones in on the work events, which in layman's terms, I suppose, things happened at work that cause employees to have emotional reaction. And that in turn can affect their attitudes and behaviors. So my research methodology, I chose to go with semi-structured interviews, and just to echo Steve's there again, ethical approval from UCC was sought and gained for this. All participants' data is anonymized fully. Not even my supervisors know who I interviewed. And it's maintaining that, and it was reassuring the interviewees that I could gain their experiences, but while protecting their anonymity, which I think is very important, and was quite happy, and I'm quite happy to do that. So again, the interviews were recorded via MS Teams and transcribed and anonymized immediately, and then I could share that anonymized data with my supervisors. Because I suppose transcribing is it's unstructured data. I then used NVivo, which is an excellent coding tool to actually code the data where it allows you to select out. And I used again the lens of effective events theory, or AET, using the different elements from that, which also formed the basis of my questions for the interviews, as to what were the work events, what were the reactions, what work environment were they in, which is actually interesting as well, whether these events happened at home or they happened in the workplace, as in the physical office building workplace, and how it might have affected their attitudes and in turn their behaviors. So what I'm currently, I've completed coding the data, and I'm now at the stage of analyzing it. So as well as using AET, I'm also adopting the SCARF model, which is David Rock, 2008, presented in a paper. Just briefly, it looks at 5 different domains: the status, certainty, autonomy, relatedness, and fairness. And these influence our behavior in social situations. So I thought that it actually marries very well with AET. So some of the findings that I'm finding from, I'll start first with the AET perspective, is that employees use judgment-driven behaviors to avoid negative work events and negative affective reactions. And I suppose this is coming from employees who may have experienced multiple occasions of negative work events, such as Wi-Fi failing or just not having a signal, and we're aware that's an issue in Ireland, and that they are working to improve that continually. So they would actually decide, okay, I have an important meeting coming up. I'm going to go to the office, or I'm going to go to a location where I know I am assured of 100% Wi-Fi coverage. So that would be the judgment-driven behavior, so that they will avoid the possibility of that negative work event happening. Interestingly, I also found, looking at the data, is an employee's location may affect how they react to a work event. So for example, and just to continue on with the Wi-Fi failing, If it happens at home, it's more a panic and it's on me and it feels like my responsibility. Whereas if it happened in the office to them, it was more, well, everybody else is experiencing this. So I'm not, it affected them a lot less negatively than it did at home. So that was quite a fascinating finding from it, from the data. I also noticed in analyzing the data that people are contradictory. So they will laud the benefits of, we'll say, for example, remote working. Oh, it allows me time back. It's not dead time of an hour, hour and a half lost traveling to and from work. But they will then go on to say they spend that time actually doing more work. So while saying they've got a better work-life balance, they're actually in effect working longer hours, whereas you're traveling to and from work in your own time. So therefore, you're then working in your own time, which is kind of a contradiction to the saying you have a better work-life balance. Also, I noticed that habits and routines can drive behaviors. So we all develop habits. It's as the phrase go, we're creatures of habit, and we like our routines. We'll get into doing something, but it can also have a negative knock-on effect then on other people and sometimes on ourselves as well without thinking. When you consider we had a transition from pre-pandemic to pandemic to then post-pandemic, a lot of behaviors that built up during the pandemic have continued on post-pandemic. So if you wanted to talk to somebody, you slotted in 30 minutes in a calendar, had a virtual call with them. Before the pandemic, you wouldn't even have thought you'd have picked up the phone or you'd have stopped them in the corridor or popped down to their desk and asked the question. Now, some of the people I interviewed are saying is that people have retained that habit of actually still slotting 30 minutes into a calendar to have a virtual meeting when they could drop an IM or they could pick up the phone and just ask them a question. I did find that the majority of the people I interviewed use mobile phone less and they're more inclined to use IM and then email. And again, depending on the urgency, the IM is for I need an answer now, and email has become the snail mail, if you like. It's, you know, when you get a chance, pop me a response back. Also, I've noticed, I suppose, multiple occurrences of a negative work event can cause a change in a person's behaviors. And this kind of ties back in a way to the first point there about the judgment-driven behaviors. If it happens once, it's annoying, it's frustrating, but you get over it. But it's that continual build-up. If the Wi-Fi keeps going, if the same event keeps happening over and over, that's when people make that judgment-driven behavior choice and change something about it. So I just thought they were some interesting findings, and obviously I'm still ongoing on those. Just to briefly explain a bit more about the SCARF model then. So status, certainty, autonomy, relatedness and fairness. So status, I just started taking some of that data I discussed and slotting into kind of where might this fit in on the SCARF model. So take, for instance, the Wi-Fi failure. You're experiencing the emotion, it's embarrassment, it's fear. It could be that fear that their employer will think they're not working. So it's affecting their perception then of their status compared to their manager or their leader. Equally so, if you're presenting to a client and your Wi-Fi goes down, your fear is that you may appear as unprofessional if you can't join that meeting or disappear mid-sentence. And that in your own mind then is lowering your status and how the client might perceive you. In certainty, employees definitely, and every person employed said this, they like the flexibility of being able to choose to work remotely. And again, I suppose that ties in with the autonomy, but it's knowing that they have certain days at home. Okay, I can plan this because I'm going to be at home Mondays and Fridays. That note I mentioned as well, tying in with the work event, working remotely saves the dead time of traveling and gives a better work-life balance. However, they also use the time saved to do additional work. But also, one or two interviewees noted if they're working remotely, they may continue working after hours to complete a job. Whereas in the office, 5 p.m. comes, they shut down and they just go in next day and resume the job, which I thought that was interesting in that you would think you have a better work-life balance if you're working remotely, but yet you'll stay on and carry on working on that. So also tying in, I suppose, a bit into behaviors there. Autonomy, I thought the judgment-driven behaviors to avoid the negative work events slotted into this well. So they have the autonomy to change their locations or go into the office for those important meetings to avoid the negative work events. But another thing, they also have the choice to turn off notifications to avoid distractions and interruptions. It's so we'll say you get a ping on your phone or you get a little thing flashing up in the right-hand corner saying you've got mail. You're instantly, even if you don't go and check the mail, it's enough to distract and interrupt your flow in what you're working on. So relatedness, I slotted in, and again, as I said, the analysis is currently ongoing with these. So I hope to populate these a lot more and fine tune them. And the negative work event happening in the different locations, you're relating, everybody's experiencing the same work event, so it has less of an impact on it. I thought that tied in well into relatedness. And fairness, from a technology perspective, we see Zoom, Teams, WebEx, and actually I seem to be seeing WebEx more of late, which is interesting considering it was there long before Zoom or Teams took off. Is the employees, I suppose, could have the perception that it's not fair, that they're not allowed to use the tool they want to use. They have to use the tool that the company has indicated should be used. But then they will see higher up leadership using the tool that they want to use rather than the one the company has indicated. So that then can have a negative impact on their attitudes. Lack of communications or unclear instructions from leadership can also impact their behavior. And fairness as well is if you don't see others engaging to the same level you are, such as switching off cameras or just sitting silently through the whole movie, cameras off, muted, and not saying one word, that can start to frustrate or annoy some of the employees then as well. So I suppose it is still early days yet on the data analysis. So I'll continue on the data analysis using both AET and SCARF, exploring the approach and avoid response. So approach is the approach is if they see it as being rewarding, and avoid is if they see it as being a threat. So just analyzing the work events to see what are their reactions out of that. And then of course, comparing the findings to what's in the literature already. And the small 3 little words, but will probably take a lot of time, is write the paper. And I do want to end just on one quote there, and it's actually just 2 different interviewees said it to me. Said, you control technology, it does not control you. But I would add the ... for a bit of food of thought to end on, or does it? So thank you, short and sweet there. And
fantastic. And of course, Marshall McLuhan would say that probably the technology does end up controlling us, you know, and changing society. And I think that's probably a big basis for your research as well, Elaine, though, in terms of how you started off there. You said that, you know, COVID happened, practices had to change. But actually, how have those practices evolved since? If it is since COVID, I'm not sure. Maybe some of us still see COVID as here, but what impact is it having on us? I think is a really interesting angle. And also, you set me right in a recent email, you know, saying that you're definitely sort of taking the employee perspective. There's a lot of people looking at this from an organizational perspective, and you've been looking at it from the individual perspective, which is very, very interesting. Elaine, I remember you before, and maybe back to that idea of status that you spoke about, that there's nearly a pecking order as to how people are nearly perceived now in organizations, depending on whether they're in the office, they're not in the office, to know whether and how they even behave when, let's say, they're using Teams or Zoom, etc. Can you tell us a little about that?
Yeah, and I suppose it's twofold, Paddy. One I noticed is that the employees with less experience, newer to the company, we'll say, so irrespective of age, if they're newly started in a company, they would have more fear of being seen that they're not doing their job, or embarrassment that, you know, people might think that they're just sitting back and having a hoolie because they're working remotely. Um, they rarely mentioned their peers. It was always, what will my manager think?
Mm-hmm.
And another note as well, and I suppose it's on the technology use. One particular person I was interviewing noted that if she gets an IM while she's working, if it's her manager or leader, instant response. If she sees another name, she knows it's a peer. It's kind of, oh yeah, that's not that urgent. I can leave that until later. So it's definitely, and even some of the leaders mentioned to me, you know, I will often not join a meeting because I know they'll speak more freely if I'm not there, and they'll get a better result from it. So it's, and I think that shows a great awareness in leaders that see that when's the time to join and when's the time to not be there. That employees can have that freedom. But it's interesting as well in that one or two of the leaders I interviewed noted that they felt employees were less inclined to speak on camera, that they felt they were being recorded, irrespective of whether they were being recorded or not. And in most cases, they weren't. But they also, whereas they felt in person, they could say something and it would stay in the room. So it's interesting that the mindsets that people will apply to technology, even like I know we're being recorded today, but if you're having a video conference with someone, it's not being recorded, it's not being transcribed, but there is still that almost that threat or fear in the background. This must be recorded, and I don't know, does it come from, you know, once it's on the internet, it's always on the internet, and is this part of the internet, or, you know, is Big Brother watching and listening, whereas in a room in person you can say something aside to someone and you feel it stays there. So it's interesting, and definitely something I'll be diving into more on.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So the way we engage and how open we are in those engagements, definitely from what you're starting to see, varies depending on whether the other person is in the physical room with you or whether they're maybe in a Teams or Zoom session. And if they're in a Teams or Zoom session, you may well be less likely to be open in your conversation. That's really interesting. And Elaine, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think I also heard you say that the way, and this is related to it, that the way we see others uh, differs depending on whether they are more likely to be in the room with us versus whether they're more likely to be online, and then depending on whether they're more likely to have their camera on or off. The way we see them differs depending on how close they are or how close it feels they are to us. I'm not sure if you've expanded a bit more on that or whether that's something, you know, that you have found to be the case.
It's something I suppose just touched on so far in the research, Paddy. But definitely from an innovative and creative perspective, people felt that was more in the room. Some did agree it could be done virtually, but never to the same effect. And I don't know if this is answering your question or if it's taking it slightly sideways, but I thought it was an interesting observation from the data that because you can spark these side conversations and people are more inclined to step in or walk up to the whiteboard and write something, that it's the innovation and creativity is happening more in person. And I suppose just coming back as well to the contradictions, is some would say you make a better connection in person. And one particular interviewee, she said, yeah, I really feel I have to meet them once at least, you know, and then I could do it virtually after that. But then she went on to say in the interview that she got to know the personal side of people better because she was seeing whether it was cats in the background or a painting that became a conversation starter at the start of meetings. So meetings have definitely moved on where once you have that bit of chit chat at the start and or end of the meeting, it's making it more like the in-person experience. And I suppose maybe we're still waiting for technology to get to that feeling. I don't know, it'll never be 100%, I suppose, but there will be a touch of it. But you then have to fight that fear of what if I'm being recorded or listened to. So there's definitely going to be, I'd say, some very interesting insights coming out once I finish the data analysis.
I'm going to push you a little bit further because
Yeah.
there is a lot of talk, or has been a lot of talk about, whether people's progression in organizations is dependent on to what extent do they show up in the office versus being more online, so again, is there fears among, let's say, the employees, the individuals, that if they're more likely to be online and more likely to have the camera off, that they will be passed over in terms of maybe future opportunities, that in a way they're being forgotten about nearly, their contribution has nearly been forgotten about?
And one or two did touch on that. One in particular said it has to be more intentional if you're online. So you have to make that extra effort. But equally so, one or two others noted that the culture of the company isn't there virtually. That's where you have to go into the office and have meet these people. And it's finding the right balance. It's if you're going to do the in office, do it for the right reasons, not to have meetings that could be done virtually, but to bring people in for the likes of the culture, the creativity, the innovation.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, no, interesting. And I know there's questions coming in here as well, Elaine. Just one, and actually maybe I'll hold that after the question because it's maybe a sort of more a capstone question. So John here is saying, how challenging was it trying to convince your participants of their personal protection in terms of maybe opening up to you, Elaine? The actual safety anonymization is one thing, gaining their affirmative belief and consent another, question mark.
It wasn't difficult. I think I took an open and transparent view to them. I said, look, they're going to be saved and secure, and it was part of the application process as well for the college's approval. Is your data is going to be stored securely. It will be completely anonymized. Again, starting every meeting with saying, I'm recording and transcribing this. Is that okay? It's getting their continual informed consent. And they were very relaxed and happy to just chat away with me then. I don't think it hindered in any way that we did it virtually.
Mm. And again, they trusted your motives, I think, that you were really looking for those sort of individual employee perspectives, I think was probably
Yeah,
important as
it's
well.
like, I told them what I would be doing with the data.
Mm.
It's so I think they, as you mentioned, that they were very clear. I want their perspective. I am interested in their perspective. It will be used in they will not be identified. It's the perspective I'm interested in, not who they're working for. Their names will never be mentioned. And I literally have anonymized everything. So
Yeah, and back to this concept of insider. I think they nearly see you as an insider as well, Elaine. One of them, and being able to relate to them and they to you. So Scott here is saying today's New York Times reports that multiple different studies find widely different productivity impacts from today's remote workforce, from 19% decline to 24% increase. I wonder if your observations about the relationship between the standard working day and the actual hours worked, as you observed, is factored in.
Yeah, the majority of the people I employed felt they were more productive working from home. Some felt there was no difference whether they were in the office, but as I did note earlier, they then found they were working longer hours.
Mm,
They will stick at a job if they're in the flow and get it done, rather than trying to pick it up again the next day, which they would have done if they were based in the office. One particular person I interviewed, who I would say is very much an outgoing people person, felt he was more productive in the office with other people. He liked the company of other people, doing things with other people, and hated working remotely. He couldn't wait to get back into the office. I'd say he was one of the first clawing down the door once people were allowed to return. So I again, I suppose it's experiences are varied. Everybody's experience is individual. It's almost something that you can't measure.
mhm, mm,
Um,
yeah.
because you're not going to have any two people the same. And I think that's where it's interesting is from an employee perspective, then is that you're getting all these different perspectives.
Mm. It's an interesting question, I think, as
Yeah.
well, because
And well worth looking at the
yeah,
data with that focus in
I
mind.
think
And
so.
thank you for that
Yeah.
question.
Yeah, because
Was
I
it
think
Scott? Yeah.
yeah, it was Scott definitely,
Yeah.
and like so, people may be getting more done, but if they're working more hours, then it doesn't necessarily mean they're more productive. So I
Mm,
think it's a really interesting insight. And then over time, did people decide to reduce down their number of hours to a work day? And then it appeared that they were less productive.
mm.
So really, really interesting comment.
So they may
Uh,
have been overproductive and then gone back to normal productivity.
or they were working so many hours that they weren't necessarily more productive. They were getting more done, but
Mm,
they were working more hours. So
yeah.
essentially, the amount they were doing per hour didn't increase, but it looked like from an organizational point of view as if they were more productive, but
Mm.
then ultimately started reducing down their hours again. So really interesting question as well from Steve, and I'm going to maybe paraphrase it into a question I had here as well. What are organizations getting wrong here, Elaine, do you think, based on what you've seen so far, in terms of how they're managing this situation?
I wouldn't say getting it wrong, Paddy, but I think it's has become maybe more towards the pandemic gave employees the time to stop and think and what do they want from life. So it's now, I think, like maybe never before when it comes to I suppose the technology age. Um, they want that choice. Employees want that choice. And if the job has been proven that they can do it remotely, then that should be a choice there for them. Obviously, there are some jobs that can't, you frontline workers, obviously that can't be done remotely. But for jobs that can, but equally from a mental health perspective, I don't think fully remote, from what the people I interviewed are saying, fully remote isn't right either. It needs to be that hybrid
Mm,
where you decide, okay, we want everybody in the office Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, or we want everybody, every second Monday, or pick days and be intentional in when you're bringing people together and why you're bringing people together.
yeah, really, really interesting.
Yeah.
And actually, it just reminds me as well, Elaine. There was I definitely read some material that probably sort of the tail end of COVID. So I'm not sure what it looks like now, but um, some commentary about that females really lost out through in some cases through home working from home, because they ended up with the responsibility to their professional career for their company, but also then we're trying to juggle that with more duties in the home, compared to what they would normally do if they had been in the office. So it was a double I suppose a double whammy. So again, I'm not sure if that's something that might appear in the research again. That onus or that pressure that ended up on some groups.
I think in some way it was the opposite, Paddy, in that it gave the partners, and I don't want to specifically say female because it worked, but it gave them an understanding of what their partners do on both counts. And it became more a shared where I'll take the kids to work or to school today, or you take the kids and I'll cook the dinner. I think it more shared the responsibilities within the home, but that then became the routine or the habit within the home. And that's where, if you're suddenly told, I want you back in the office 5 days a week, is where you're getting that. From my research, that's what I'm seeing. That is where you're getting that aggro. We've just got into this routine. We're quite happy. We're both working away on this. One interview, interestingly, did note he's got an office upstairs and I'm downstairs with the two kids.
Yeah, yeah.
So having a dedicated workspace definitely seemed to be better for anyone I interviewed, that they could just close the door and walk away from it in the evening. Whereas if you've got the kids running in and out, or it's your computer is just there, it's too easy to actually stay online or go back and do a few hours once the kids are gone to bed. And you may work flexibly, and that's the routine you may have, but it's having that point where you're at that boundary where you're able to close that door. But I don't, and like I interviewed males and females, single, married, kids, no kids. And I don't think any of them ever made that comment about the working from home. I've more to do now because I have a female.
Yeah, it raises an interesting point, and we probably need to close out a bit now, but I'm intrigued by the topic is that, of course, how we react to work events is shaped, if we are at home, by maybe relationship issues, with partners, with kids, with whatever's happening in that house, all of a sudden can impact how we react to our work events, and vice versa. Of course, something happening with a work event or an episode at work can impact our relationships with others, partners, kids as well, which I think is a really important part of that ACE, the effective events theory model. And here, Julianne, and I know Julianne is involved in sort of digitalization and digitization of services. Julianne is saying, so interesting, Elaine. I think the difference in engagement online is very dependent on the personalities involved. I know some people actually feel less intimidated using online engagement, especially if there are people that don't often get asked to engage. I 100% agree that typical engagement tools are more limited online at the moment, and people aren't used to a lot of online collaboration tools. There's nothing like sticking a few post-its on the wall. Okay, and I'm not sure, we don't actually, sometimes I know when we talk, Elaine, I see post-its behind you on the wall, but so any comments to Juliana? Maybe we'll start to wrap up at that point.
Yeah, and it's interesting. One particular person I interviewed, and I suppose what he delivers both online training and in-person training, and has found that a blend is almost his preferred one now. But he actually found the opposite in his case, that the quieter people might actually say something in person, whereas he's experienced on calls, they're just too shy, they don't want to go on camera, whereas in person they may stick that post-it on the wall, or they may pipe up and add something to something's being said. So it's interesting, and it's one I'll keep in mind as I delve further into the data. Is there that, again, it's coming down, it's interesting to see the contradictions that are there. What totally 180 perspectives depending on the person you interview or the person you talk to. I do think personality definitely, as you mentioned, has a lot to do with it. Like, some people will engage naturally, whether it's bumping into someone in a corridor, being in a meeting, or on video. And interestingly, even AET looks at dispositions or personalities of people as how they may react to a negative or positive work event.
Yeah, and exactly, you know, AET looks at this position thing. So again, some really interest, or we expect some really interesting insights that will come from that. Elaine, thanks so much. I think there's been great engagement on it as well. I know it's probably a topic that exercises a lot of minds, you know, in terms of our own individual situations, but also from an organizational point of view. How can we get the most out of people in a way that's meaningful for those employees as well? So thanks so much, Elaine. And again, anyone wants to talk to Elaine about this topic or related topics, I'm sure Elaine will be more than happy to do so.
Delighted to Paddy. I welcome all questions and thank you for those who did put through questions. It certainly helps with my research when I get questions that get me to think differently about the data as well. Because sometimes you can drown in the data, it being a data lake, I suppose. But it allows you to hone in with different perspectives, I think, and you get new insights from that again. So thank you all, and for the opportunity, Paddy, to speak today.
No, well done. And look, what I think is really characteristic of the two presentations so far is that we're willing to challenge what is in the media. You know, again, there can be some really lazy analysis, you know, that paint a sort of a one size sort of for all people picture in the media. And I love the fact that even some of those questions, you know, Elaine was pushing back saying, no, I'm not seeing that, but we're seeing this other thing. I think that's, I suppose, really in tune with how we want to use research, you know, to challenge and to look for that evidence, you know. So well done, Elaine.